I'm sorry my dad could not be here today because he was traveling, so he nominated me to speak on behalf of him. And I think that's quite ironical because it's generally a second and third generation who are blamed for businesses going bust. But hopefully, me and my brother will try not to do that. The talk by my dad was on survival and success, which deals with some of the traps that a young entrepreneur generally faces, and where he tends to leak money in the beginning, and that's a lot of bright ideas sort of go bust because the funding went all wrong, or the money got leaked in places where you really which were not productive. So to begin with, my dad was born in a very typical Marwadi Banya family where from day one it was ingrained in his head that whatever you do, you have to do business. So doing business was the only core competency he sort of grew up with in his family, and the mentality was a little bit different than a typical entrepreneur creates a value proposition and then takes it to the market. Here the mindset was a little different. It was sort of let's go to the market and we'll find something to sell. Right? So in his early years he was mentored by his mama, which is his mother's brother, N.K. Firodia, who was the founder of Bajaj Auto. So this is where he sort of learned his business principles, and he also took a lot of interest talking to business owners and understanding how they build their businesses. So this went a long way towards sort of helping him understand where the value proposition is, where the money is more productive, where it's not. So the first thing he learned is that you have to think differently compared to existing businesses if you want to grow from the very beginning, and that you have to be a value-added person. If you cannot recognize where you're adding the value, you're doing something wrong. And constantly, if you're building a new business, you have to break the system and optimize constantly in order to survive. So this sort of practical approach where it's sort of learning not just for the sake of learning, but so that you can turn it into a useful product was ingrained in him from the very beginning. And in his final year, instead of a 150-page theoretical thesis, he did a 21-page experimental thesis on gum production for food based on forest produce. This was the first time that somebody had done something like this in his college, and the initiative was really appreciated by his professor. So he was always focused on learning for the sake of sort of bringing something to the market. So he started out in 1978, just when he graduated, and he set up a manufacturing unit at the age of 20, only on sort of 8 days of training at a foam factory. And then he studied about the subject in the library, and sort of just took a plunge with him and his brother. And it was a lot of hard work. He was not really, he faced a lot of challenges because he wasn't really well versed with technology per se. You learned chemical engineering, but you really didn't learn chemistry or really the stuff that makes things sell. And so he struggled a lot. It was a lot of hard work. He only took 3 holidays in a year, no Sundays off, and really went through that grind. And there was a tremendous pressure to succeed because he'd just come out of college and he'd taken money from his dad. But this is where he sort of learned to sort of have that never give up attitude, which was built during this time. But at some point he started choking in terms of his knowledge of technology and his ability to create products that are disruptive. He was only limited to technologies that were already in the market, and to come in as a Me Too product is very difficult. So at that point he realized that he really needed higher education. So that's when he decided that a PhD is what I need in order to learn more, in order to become more technologically competent. So he head off to the US, and he got his PhD. He worked with Pittsburgh Paint and Glass, which is a very big chemical company, and that's really where he learned how to he learned the art of sort of applying chemical engineering and chemistry into a product development program and bringing it to the market, because PPG was an excellent at doing that. And he chose his mentors at that company. He always knew at the back of his head that one day he wants to start his own business and he's probably going to leave. I think that emboldened him a little bit more during his time at PPG, where he was very upfront. He chased down people. He was never afraid. And sort of that attitude helped him actually succeed even at PPG, where in the history of the company, he was taken from fresh PhD to a manager within 2 years. Nobody else had done that. But still, at the end of the day, the urge to have his own business was so strong that he moved back to India. Back in the 80s, if you had a green card, you were stupid to come back here. But that was the advice that had been given to him. But he came back to India, and he came back with sort of 6 technically viable projects that he could begin hitting the ground from day one. And sure enough, none of them worked. So he ended up doing something completely different. What he did find was that the core competency he developed now in terms of his business skills and his technology skills, there was a big demand for value-added chemical products in the textile industry, and that's why he chose to come to Gujarat, when the textile industry was booming at that point. I think the moral of the story is that you constantly learn if opportunity knocks, because he was desperate to start a business, and if the textile industry was where he was headed, that's where he was going to go. So, in the beginning, as a cash-starved business, you need extreme prudence in spending, and always look to cover money generation and savings in every process and opportunity. One of the things that he keeps telling my brother and I is that when you go out and spend money on a marketing trip, did you at least pay back for the trip by the time you came back? If so, at least you broke even. And that's what you really need to do, bare minimum. That was the attitude that he had as far as sort of scrounging for money in the beginning. So being thrifty is good as an entrepreneur who's starting up. And he always made sure that he achieved. He was not the kind of entrepreneur who would sink a lot of money in the beginning and then let the market sort of grow and recover the money. His attitude, his sort of way of working was always to sell in cash and make profits from day one. And so that allowed him to grow very fast. It's very difficult to sell when you go that way, but his ability to sell was very good. So that's the path that he followed. And when you're a 10 to 20 people organization, survival is the first religion, because you do whatever it takes as an entrepreneur to survive. So by 1990, he had already built a good, solid business, and there are 20 to 100 people in this organization, and sort of liabilities and laws and these sort of things begin to take a bite at your business if you are not compliant. It's very important that by the time you are 20 to 100 people organization, you are 100% compliant to government laws, and reward all the co-workers whom you think are adding value to your company. You have to understand the difference between promoter equity and sweat equity by the co-workers, and apply prudence to compensate both. What that means really is that yes, there are people who come invest in your business, and yes, you owe them a return on that, but then there are also people who generate value in your business by working very hard, and you need to compensate them for that as well. In the beginning, he didn't have people who were marketing people who were adding value to his business, and he had created enough products that were really on the strength of the value proposition were selling themselves. It's very important to recognize whether your product is selling itself or your marketing people are the people responsible for selling your product and are they creating value. At one point, the company started doing really well, and the sales people and marketing people are like, we need to be compensated better. He's doing well. And he said, he's a proper, he learned to scrounge for money, and he's the fact that he's like, okay, let's form a committee. I won't be on the committee. Everyone come and present your case as far as what value add have you created in terms of your marketing call. And one by one, nobody could really explain their case that this is what I did, something, put thought into this and this is why it sold. No. At the end of the day, he proved to everybody the product was selling and there was no point in compensating anybody more. But that's the kind of exercise he had to do to convince people that, look, I can't pay you anymore. I'm still a growing business. I need money to survive. And so, so moving on, I think 1996 to 2015, the company started growing much larger. So, it is one of the aims of the company. One of the things the company needs to do is to become socially responsible as you grow beyond 100 plus people. In the beginning, you need speed of decision making, and you need to hire people who can do sales, people who can do logistics all in one, and really go around as the CEO of a company or as the person driving the business saying that, may I help you attitude. You have to take a stab at all different aspects of your business. And as the company grows larger, you would want to hand over the key areas of the company to 6-7 people so that you can, but still constantly follow up on a personal basis of what is going on. Because the point is to really keep an eye on the company's processes and make sure that you're not losing money on sort of things that are processes that are not productive. Once the company goes beyond 100 plus, it's a matter of scalability. You have to develop systems, you have to measure your outputs and adopt the best practices globally. Maybe back in the 80s, earlier, small was beautiful because we didn't have the technology or the IT to sort of keep an eye on the micro processes of the business, and it helped being a small company where you could be a lot more, you could be nifty. But now with with IT and the modern management practices, it's sort of big is beautiful is the new mantra, if you want to say. In fact, if your business does not have plans to expand quick, it's very difficult to sort of in an era where the technology is moving very fast, to have the kind of funding to keep creating disruptive innovations one after the other, which it takes for a small company to start growing big. There is the disadvantage of sort of losing control and the speed of execution is becoming less, and so the key is innovation for new business development. That's where you really want to put your resources. Are you adding value every day? Are you innovating every day? Have you created new products or have you created new markets every day? That's really where your money today needs to be going. So just to summarize, some of the key sort of advice my dad likes to give, and trust me, he's repeated this to me and my brother all the time. It's like, unless you ask as a small entrepreneur, nobody gives. You have to really go hunting for people, even to the point of making them uncomfortable. But you really need to go and ask people all the time. You, as a small business, you have to focus and put checkpoints in the organization so that you avoid the diffusion of efforts and resources. Resources are very limited, and every resource spent has to make a huge impact when you're a small growing business. Once in a while, your company goes through sort of supernormal profits, and you have to recognize whether that was really because of the value add you did or because you were just at the right time, right place, and the markets clicked and you made a lot of money. If that's the case, it's prudent to always save for a rainy day later. It's important to reward people for hard work and application of mind, and not simply because they are bringing in sales volume. The reason he says that is that there could be a person who has not really understood how to market your product properly, but he goes to this one big customer and things click and he didn't have to try hard and he's buying a lot of material, and suddenly this guy becomes a star salesman. And the person who really knows how to sell your product made a very difficult sale at a small volume company. Whom do you compensate? How do you choose? This is something you have to be very judicious about. So, as I said, reward people for hard work and application of mind, and not simply go by sales volume numbers. As an entrepreneur, you are a risk taker. You always have to ask yourself one question before you enter, into the process of being an entrepreneur, is that if you lose money, if you put in your savings and you walk away with nothing, are you prepared to go back on a bicycle and start your business all over again? If the answer is yes, then you're in the right, you're in the right way. And can you work on the shop floor without an air conditioner? He likes to say air conditioner because in India we have, the summer is devastating. Working on the shop floor in the summer is what really he thinks is like, sort of the acid test of can you be an entrepreneur and work on the shop floor. So that's his key. And here's my favorite one. This drives me and my brother nuts. He says, "Be lucky." So we both look at each other and then we look at him. It's like, how can you give that as an advice? That's ridiculous. We do all of the things that you talk about, and then you say, "Oh, now be lucky on top of that." So that's it drives us up the wall, and he sort of laughs at us, sort of taunting us. But I think over the time I've realized that if you're judicious, if you're prudent about where you spend your money, if you realize who's adding value in your business from the very beginning and who's not, and compensate the right people, and you truly enjoy the process of developing technology, bringing it to the market, and enjoying being an entrepreneur, you will be involved, you will become so involved in the process that you will realize when luck comes your way, and you will be primed to ride it, into sort of a successful business future. So I think that's what probably he means by being lucky. So in that way, good luck to everybody here, and thank you so much.
Roughly about 300 crores. So that's I'm getting into that. So the innovation that his father has created, which just like a typical Marwadi gave us the patta advice, right? These are jewels of how he got that. But he can tell us what he's doing. He has created. Well, I'm going to share the secret. He has created a nanoparticle. Okay, cool.
Yeah, sure. I mean, oh, okay. No, he's simply trying to, But I think the core of the business really is our ability to, he learned over time to become he got trained in polymer chemistry. So polymer physics, synthesis of polymers was a core competency. And along the way, he got in an expert who is very good at organosilase and using polymers, which it's ubiquitous everywhere, and organosilase, which really forms the interface between the organic and the inorganic world. These two sort of chemical core competencies were then put through sort of a product development for what are India's needs today. And for example, we have a waterproofing product that is very eco-friendly, because organosilase typically have been have needed solvents to use and then produce the waterproofing effect. But our silanes are water dispersible or water soluble, and so it's sort of an eco-friendly solvent, eco-friendly application. And the problem that India faces from the market point of view is that all our infrastructure and our buildings are destroyed because of the monsoons that we have and the variability in temperature that we have. And so this is something that where you could take organosilase, apply it to an existing need in the Indian market, produce an eco-friendly product at a cheap price, and that's where really the opportunity was. This is sort of one of our growing businesses. Similarly, we have soil conditioners where polymers were used to create soil conditioners that produce very high yields in agriculture. There are different sort of polymers, chemistries that were used to produce paints, which have very, very good price to performance ratios in the market. So this is sort of the portfolio of the company today.
And our product that we all know in the US is you take their product and you mix it with tar, and it increases the life of the road by a multiple.
Right. So because tar is sort of an organic phase, and what you're trying to do is cover the rocks and stones and bind them with the organic phase. There's a huge mismatch in terms of you have non-organic, you sort of have inorganic phase that is polar, and you have bitumen that is non-polar. How do you interface the two? And that's where silence comes in. and that was really an opportunity that we saw where we could take silence and take them into the road industry. And we saw a big need for it, because today it's all about making sure that you use your resources optimally and ensuring the life of a road, say instead of 5 years, if it lasts 15 years, that's you consume 3 times, you mine 3 times less the stones, you consume 3 times less of the crude oil that goes into making roads. So that is something that our company has done very well in the recent years. Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely.
So with that, we'll take questions.
Hi, I'm Sridhar. Since you talked about being an entrepreneur and getting your own business up, I had this question. Suppose you have an idea. Okay, you have a really good idea and you invest your money, your time, your hard work inside it. But suppose it just does not click. You don't earn in the short run and you're making losses. So how do you know whether you want to invest more, keep on investing more and hoping that it does work, or put it out, take your investment out and switch your idea? So how do you decide that?
I think that's a combination of various factors. You have to really, gauge your product versus whom you're competing with, and do you really see the fact that although your product may be a different, it may be a different platform, and does it have scope for refinement? Is it just, are you just comparing your competitors, yours a refined product versus your really sort of, rudimentary product, and do you have scope to refine it further and be disruptive onwards? These are things. Certainly, second thing is you always have to keep going to investors. You never know where the next stream of money is coming in. So that's the kind of, that's the hard work that they say an entrepreneur goes through. And at some point, it's really a person's ability, how much of a beating can you take till you decide. That's it, But one thing is for sure, even if you end up taking a beating and, are not successful as an entrepreneur, the skills that you pick up along the way take you a long way forward in other areas. You suddenly become, extremely employable to another company that maybe their product clicked and they got the funding. Now you know the entire entrepreneurial process inside out. Suddenly you are a really valuable resource that can be deployed. So these things, I think, just because you're an entrepreneur and failed does not mean that you did not add value to your career.
But now, when you are taking this business forward, I want to know what are your new visions and how are you going to take this business to a greater level, next level?
I think that's a good question, because that's something that my brother and I we've always talked about. That generation of chemical technologies is what the company does best is already there. We take technologies, we match them with market requirements, and we try to create products around it. But technology evolves as well. So my brother and I have first and foremost trained ourselves in the hard part, that's the technical part, learning the science. And we're hoping that along the way we can learn the business part too. But really, our plan is to really work on the shop floor from the day one. That's where we start. So I'm involved in research and development and sort of the production. And I really don't, my father told me, don't worry about the finances or the marketing or anything. Learn the technical core first, the other things will sort of fall into place. So I think as a second generation entrepreneur, I would say it's most important to start back on the shop floor where your own father started. I think that's most important.
So any other questions? Otherwise we break for lunch. We're running about 15 minutes late. So instead of a 45-minute lunch, let's make it a half an hour lunch.